Well, good evening, and thank you for tuning in this evening. My name's Eugenia Gibbons, and I'm going to be your host for a discussion, a learning session related to the debt exclusion question that's coming up on the November 7th ballot. We are about a week away from the election, and Melrosians and Melrose voters are going to be asked to make a decision regarding the future of public safety buildings here in the city of Melrose. I'm joined this evening by members of the police and fire departments. I'll also be joined by the co-chair of the Melrose Response Campaign Committee. And the goal for each of them is really to help the public understand what it is that they're being asked to commit to, what the process will look like going forward, and why it is that we need to be investing in our public safety facilities. But before we get into that conversation, I'm also delighted to be joined this evening by our state representative, Kate Lipper-Garabedian, who has been a supporter of the investment in our public safety buildings. You're obviously a strong supporter of many things in the community. And we asked you to speak a little bit about the question of the debt exclusion, the role of the state in making or supporting investments in public facilities like those that need to be invested here in Melrose, and sort of what you see as the conversation happening at the state level. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kate, and would love it if you could help us understand, because a question that often comes up is, why can't the state prioritize or pay for this? I'd love it if you could help listeners out there understand sort of what the role of the state is in this process.
Certainly, and thank you for having me, Eugenia, and thank you to the Melrose Response Campaign Committee for putting this forum on. It's really helpful to get out the information. I know you have been looking for many ways in which to engage the community and think about how we want to step forward and support our public safety officials. As you have noted, I am certainly supportive of this ballot initiative, and I'm encouraging those who haven't voted yet in the election this fall to also vote yes on November 7th. In terms of the state's role here, certainly as a state representative for the city of Melrose, I look for opportunities with the full legislative delegation to bring money back to the district. And over the last 3 years, we've done that in a variety of ways through earmarks. But when you hear the amounts of these earmarks, you'll quickly realize that they are not the type of funding mechanism that's necessary and that could cover something like a capital investment of upgrading the much-needed renovations of our 3 fire stations and addressing the woefully inadequate police department with a new building. So, for example, this year we were able to secure $150,000 to shore up some critically needed issues at the main fire station, $75,000 for the police department for some cameras and then, some radios, and then $60,000 for fire breathing apparatus for the fire department. That's the type of investment in earmarks that we can achieve through a budget or an economic development bill. But when it comes to a multi-million-dollar project that a local community is interested in for its public safety buildings, there's simply no state program that exists right now to drive a state component of support for this. You all, people who are watching, are probably familiar with the library fund that the state has established. There's a program there that cities and towns can apply to a state program where the state can step in and provide some of the funding to upgrade or renovate a library. We also have the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which has assisted with a number of renovations at some of our schools. And, the Wakefield High School, for example, will be using MSBA funding through the state to help offset some of the local contribution. Nonetheless, the Wakefield itself, in any community, would have to put forward a lot of money of local dollars as well for a capital investment like this. So currently, as we've discussed, there is a bill pending in the legislature that would create a similar entity like the School Building Authority to address public safety buildings, because colleagues across the Commonwealth have acknowledged that this kind of cost on a community is incredibly significant, and truly the only avenue available is a debt exclusion. The city's operating budget just can't cover the costs of something like this, which is why it has to go to the voters in an election, which is what's happening this fall. I'm certainly supportive of that bill. I've signed on as a co-sponsor. Senator Lewis has as well. Mayor Broder went and testified to the committee when this bill was up for a hearing in support. It's a great idea, and one that obviously we would love to have in reality at this point, but we're talking years away from that actually coming to fruition. If it ever did, it's a first-time file. more than 7,000 bills are in front of the legislature this session alone. And so even if we got it moving, there would still take a good number of years to figure out the funding stream for it, to establish the regulations and rules for it. And so it's just not an option for Melrose, and waiting, as long as we've been waiting for decades of underinvestment in the public safety buildings, it's really critical at this juncture that Melrose, lead here, and the way to do that is through this ballot initiative.
So thank you so much for that explanation. And what we hear is it would be nice if there were state resources available, but that just doesn't exist yet, even though there are efforts underway to try to create a mechanism like that. You mentioned that there are a number of legislators who are supportive of this proposed bill, and that there are many folks in the legislature who are thinking about this. Can you describe a little bit, why is it that this is front of mind for a number of folks who are representing different communities? Well,
I think the reason is because what we're facing here is very similar to other cities and towns, where you're not going to be able to fund this type of project through your own borrowing capability in any given year. The revenues just aren't there. Mm-hmm. And so it's really a struggle to figure out a way then to provide the 21st century working environment that our public safety officials and leaders really deserve, to ensure that they're being effective in keeping our community safe. And so the only option really then is, as we've discussed, to do a local initiative like this and ask voters to approve the city going out and borrowing more, and therefore increasing our tax burden for the period of time in which the debt is then paid off. So we're not unique, I guess, is the point.
Yeah. It sounds like we are not. We are an old state with a lot of old buildings in well-established cities. So, well, thank you so much for providing that context at the state level, and also for helping folks understand why it's so important that we continue to partner with our state delegation on these capital investments, but also that ultimately at this time it is going to fall to the community to make that investment together, because those resources for public safety buildings don't exist in the same way that they do for school buildings or for the library, as you noted.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'm sure we might have additional questions for you, but at this time you have teed us up perfectly to get into the nuts and bolts of a debt exclusion and this campaign. So I'm actually going to say thank you so much and invite you to step to the side for a moment and invite Alyssa Pesce to come up.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
And while Alyssa's walking up, I'll encourage folks who are listening or watching online to feel free to text or call messages or questions to 781-317-5060. That's 781-317-5060. We'll be happy to field questions in real time via text or call. Alyssa, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you guys so much for coming this evening. I appreciate the support.
So we have a lot of questions to get to, and I'm so glad to be joined by the three of you. Before we dive into questions, I'll do a quick round of intros. We're joined by Alyssa Pesce, who is the co-chair of the Melrose Response Committee and also a longtime Melrose resident. You grew up here.
I did.
We're also joined by Jay Morneau.
Yeah.
You have a lot of extra letters, and I have to remember I don't have to pronounce them all. But joined by Jay Morneau, who's a Melrose Fire Lieutenant at Engine 3.
Correct.
And we're also joined by Melrose Police Patrolman Dale Parsons. And we're glad to have all three of you here.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for making time tonight. As you heard, we're here to discuss the debt exclusion question, the ballot initiative that is coming up in a week. And I'd like to dig into some questions that have already started. So one is for you, Alyssa. We heard Kate Lipper-Garabedian describe for us sort of what the debt exclusion is and why we need to be considering it. I wonder if you could sort of reinforce or help us understand further, what exactly is this question asking specifically?
So for us, a debt exclusion is our normal taxes are capped every year at a certain amount in which the city can increase our taxes. Like Kate referred to, that would never be enough for us to pay for the cost of the project that is at hand. The city can apply for a debt exclusion, which is to allow the city to apply for monies to cover the project that we have before us right now. So what the city would be allowed to do is to I'm sorry. We could apply for funds. We could borrow funds to cover the 4 projects, which ultimately would be up to a certain amount of money, and it would only go for this project. We could not use it for anything else. There would be no other access to these funds for any other project for the city, but for the 4 buildings, the 3 fire and 1 police station for the city.
Great. So essentially what the question on the ballot is asking is, what is the ballot question asking?
The ballot question is, as the community, do you allow the city of Melrose to apply for a debt exclusion as the voters of Melrose?
Great, yeah, because the city can't just go out on its own and raise taxes without
Correct.
some oversight or
Correct.
approval from the public. So when folks see the question, it is written in ballot language, sort of legal language. I'll actually read the question because I have it here. It says, shall the city of Melrose be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Proposition 2 1/2, so-called, the amounts required to pay for the bonds issued in order to pay costs for design, engineering, construction, site improvements, equipping and furnishing of a renovated Melrose Central Fire Station, a new Melrose Highlands Fire Station, a new Melrose East Side Fire Station, and a new Melrose Police Station, and all other costs incidental and related thereto. And then voters will be asked to vote yes or no. And what you are saying is essentially what that question is asking is, do you think we need to fix these buildings? And if so, do you give the city permission to move forward with that process?
Correct. Do you allow them to apply for this funding to use specifically for these projects and these projects only?
Got it. So, Jay and Dale, you work in the buildings in question, and I would love it if, as part of your introduction, each of you could give us a sense not only of how long you have been a police officer or a firefighter, but what is the average day in the life of a Melrose police officer, a Melrose firefighter, and how does your time spent in and around these buildings impact your ability to do your job? Jay, would you like to start?
Certainly. So, again, thank you. So we work 24-hour shifts at the fire department, spread over 4 groups over the course of the week. Each day, the group of men and women come in at 7 o'clock in the morning. We spend 24 hours there, eat, sleep, work, train, all at the stations each and every day. Over the last couple of years, too, we've hired women to work on the job, which is great. But it's a challenge as well at times because the facilities that we have were built with just men in mind. So trying to adapt to the living conditions for the women is a challenge as well. Fire headquarters, for example, was built in the 1890s, and it was originally designed for horse and buggy type response. So we've been working out of that building ever since. Engine 2 was built in the 1920s. The rooms over there aren't really conducive to the women on the job. Engine 3, being the newest building, has its challenges as well. Each building, Engine 3 has roof leaks. The west side, Tremont Street, has wiring issues. Asbestos has got to be abated before they can do really any work over there. And headquarters has a whole host of issues as well, from leaky roofs to unsafe electrical, rodent issues that we're trying to get under control as well over there. So trying to train and work there each day can be a challenge for all of us. And I think with the fire trucks and the rescue ambulance that we use nowadays, these buildings weren't built for that. The trucks are parked right next to our living quarters, so you've got diesel engines that are running right next to where we're sitting and eating and sleeping at times. So it becomes a challenge for us in the current living conditions.
And Dale, how about for you at the police station?
So we run 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts all year round. We don't take days off. We don't close down ever. So regardless of what shift you're on, your shift starts in our shared locker room. That is our locker room, our break room. Sometimes we sort evidence in that room if we have to. And also where we do roll call. And after roll call, after you get the orders of the day, you get your keys for your cruisers, we head out to our unsecured parking lot, which obviously presents a safety issue, not only for us officers, but also for the community, because at any given time, our cruisers are exposed to the public. So if someone were to come and do damage to our cruisers, it would obviously put the community at risk. Now, there's no typical day for first responders. Jay can obviously speak to that. You never know what you're going to encounter that day. But in terms of how the building affects our day-to-day operations, it's a morale killer for all of us who work in that building. We are embarrassed by the fact that it's not ADA compliant. There's been at least a few instances involving me where we've had to carry people into the building. And I come from the special education world. I know that that's incredibly dehumanizing to those people that, who are not, who have mobility issues, if we have to carry them in. It's also, the building itself is also dangerous. We have to navigate, when we're bringing someone in under custody, in our custody or care, we have to navigate a staircase of 10 stairs. If any one of us or the person that we are now caring for were ever to go down those stairs, we would be headed to a level 1 trauma center. That's based on your protocols. Yep. That's a huge concern for us. It's thankfully nothing has happened, knock on wood. Hopefully nothing does happen, but that is a concern of ours. Another aspect of the building is that we don't have an HVAC system. Any air that is being breathed in that just gets circulated. So if we have a prisoner or someone in protective custody that has any type of airborne illness, we're also breathing in their air. So even if they're in our cell block, it just vents right back into the department. We don't have any decontamination facility. So I was just involved in an incident where I was covered in spit and I went to go clean off and we didn't even have hot water. So I had to use the sink and cold water and soap and clean myself off. We don't have any rooms that are dedicated to decompressing or debriefing. We just had a critical incident on Friday night, and there was no room for officers to get away from that call and decompress and handle what they just saw, which is a big concern. That's something that policing is also trying to focus on now. In terms of safety as well, in other terms of safety, I should say. Again, I mentioned sorting evidence in our break room. Mm-hmm. If we have a big drug bust, for lack of a better term, there's been times where we've sorted drugs on a table that we also are supposed to have our meals on. Mm. So we are in dire needs of a new station, and that building is we have long outlived its usability. Mm.
So, I mean, those are very. It paints a grim picture of what you all are up against each day. I know that as I was obviously involved in the committee that helped to draft the report that led to a recommendation for how to move forward. That process included a comprehensive needs assessment for each department, and the final recommendation that was included, and that ultimately the Mayor Broder moved forward with, includes more space. It includes addressing some of the things that you mentioned, like building code compliance and ADA compliance. I would invite either of you to describe a little bit about how sort of a new building would impact not only morale, but also things like that we're not even thinking about, things like recruiting and retention of staff and personnel, or your ability to respond to a critical incident, as you just described.
So our current building right now is about 3 times too small of what a modern police station is. Modern police stations have family rooms where you can have either a family in crisis come and spend the night or just get away for a time period. They have custody exchange Right now, if we have custodial exchanges, they happen right in our lobby, right where we're taking walk-in reports. So we feel for the children mostly involved in those. They have sufficient evidence rooms. We have a evidence room that is far too small for what a modern police station should have. And I know that people like to think that nothing happens in Melrose, but it does, and we do collect evidence. We do have crime, and we need to expand.
Jay, how about for you?
The same at the fire department as well. We run 2 engines and a ladder truck, and although we have 3 buildings, if you drive around to the 3 buildings, you might notice some apparatus outside, some trucks outside, some equipment outside. We just don't have enough space to run the equipment we need to run on a day-to-day basis. As Dale said, there is crime in the city. We have, calls in the city, medical calls, fire calls, car accidents, hazardous material type calls. We answer more than just calls for fire. So we do need space for the equipment. And it's a challenge. Employee retention, it's a challenge as well. When you try to hire and people come in to interview and they can, go to another neighboring community and see the newer buildings and the newer stations, they can go there, they can come here. Sometimes they make a decision, they'll go to where it's more conducive to training and to learning and to working. So I think it is a challenge for us as well, for the space that we have. Although we do have 3 buildings, we do need them to be a little bit bigger as well to house what we have.
I'm glad to hear you bring up the question of 3 buildings, because I know a question that's come up a few times in public conversation has been, well, do we really need 3 fire stations? Can't we just settle on 2? I was interested and fascinated to learn that actually most of your responses at the fire department are not to fire, but they're actually to what?
Medical calls, car accidents, other hazards as well. And a lot of times we do have fires, and a lot of times because we have the 3 stations that are strategically placed throughout the city, we can get there quickly. And some of the fires you may hear about neighboring communities, we can keep them smaller, so you don't hear about them as much either. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our fires can be smaller. Mm-hmm. Medical calls, I can think of an instance where just recently up on the east side, we went to a call for a person who had fallen. We get there, and the gentleman, it was just the bottom of the hill, which is great, location from our station, was quick response time, and he had fallen because he had a heart attack in the bathroom. Mm-hmm. So on the engines, what a lot of people don't understand either, I don't think, is that the engines, we EMTs, paramedics, medical kits, defibrillators, so we can start emergency care immediately before the ambulance gets there. So having the stations, the 3 stations, I think is great for Melrose to be able to respond to these calls, get there quickly on a medical call, especially, and render care before the rescue gets there. It helps with survivability. It helps with save rates, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So it's really a matter of maintaining response times. It is, I know in the report it references the fact that we have a city that's bisected by a train track.
Correct.
That, can impact the ability to respond in a timely manner. I know that I have read analysis that also points to, and this is referenced in the report from the committee, that that fire departments are rated, and part of their rating is based on that ability to maintain compliance with National Fire Prevention standards for response time.
The NFPA, was what governs us. Much like OSHA governs the private sector, the NFPA will govern us in the response times. And that can have a wide array of implications for the city. If insurance ratings were to go down, it can cause insurance rates to go up. Mm-hmm. So that can be something to be cognizant of and aware of as well. The railroad the train tracks going through the city, having the stations the way they're situated now is great. I think that Melrose is lucky to have the 3 stations where neighboring communities. I know, for example, Saugus is trying to get a 3rd station. There's studies out there in Wakefield to get a 2nd station. A 3rd station. In the almost 24 years that I've been on the fire department, our call volume has gone up quite a bit. When I first was hired, we were probably responding to around 3,300 to 3,500 calls a year for service. Now we're well over 4,000, approaching 4,500 calls a year for service, mostly due to the new building in the community, new construction. As we know, there's new construction everywhere. So our call volume's gone up quite a bit in the time that I've been on the fire department. So I think the need for 3 stations is there, and I think going to 2 stations is going backwards, where other cities are trying to go forward and add a station.
Yeah. So, Alyssa, I want to ask you a question about, you're a resident here. You hear this. You hear that, 4 buildings is what's needed. Can you explain sort of why it is that it's so important that the ballot question includes or references those 4 buildings? And are there other opportunities for that scope to shift or for things to sort of change throughout the process going forward?
So the ballot speaks to those 4 buildings, and it goes back to that debt exclusion question in terms of that this project is specifically, the debt exclusion is specifically for this project. The need is for the 4 buildings. The project, it really can't shift. The research has been done. The research has been done for the 3 fire stations and for the police station. We can't say yes to the debt exclusion and then once the decision has been made, turn it into just changing it to 1 police station and not going forward with the fire stations. So as we move forward, if the decision is a yes, we do move forward with the project as it's been presented, to the city council back in July, I believe the date was, of last year. Specifically going forward, the city council and the new mayor will have some decisions to be made about the specifics of the details in terms of the planning and the architectural designs and such. None of that has been set specifically in terms of exactly the scope of the project, but the 4 buildings has been set in stone.
Got it. So if that question didn't reference the 4 buildings, there would be no way to, say the question had only referenced 1 building, there would be no way to address all 4.
Correct.
But because the question addresses all 4 buildings, then the design phase can now address scoping the work of all 4 buildings. So it needs to be there in order to actually address it.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
Dale, Jay spoke a lot about the importance of of response times, of the fire department's ability to get to an emergency call in a timely manner. I know we've had conversations about, in situations of emergency response, you don't want your emergency responder to be minutes away when seconds count. I'm curious, though, from the perspective of the police department, it's a little bit different in terms of where you're located and where the station is built. A question that has come up a number of times is if the city's police department were to shift from its central location where it is now to a different location in the city that's less centrally located, will that impact your ability to be responsive? What's the answer to that question?
The answer is no. It wouldn't change our response times whatsoever because the way that Melrose Police operates is we have 3 sectors, and we separate the city into these 3 sectors. So there is always a sector car, at least 1 sector car, in that specific corner of town. So the idea of a police department being centrally located is somewhat outdated because we're always out on the street. We're in these, we have each third of the city covered, and the days of people walking into the police station to report an incident has kind of gone away. They typically call us to respond to them. So the idea that moving from a centrally located station to one that's in the corner of another, a separate corner of the town, impacting the response times, that's a fallacy. It wouldn't have any impact on our response times.
Got it.
Before we go any further, you asked about recruiting and retention, and I forgot to mention. So for recruiting efforts, if the money were the same, so let me start with policing in general is not a desired profession anymore. The recruiting pool is very small, and every police department is competing for the same pool of candidates. And so if the money were the same, there's no way that a recruit would come in, do an interview at our current location, see our facility, then go to a new station in Wakefield or a new station in Malden, a new station in Medford, and choose Melrose over them. And the fact of the matter is that the money is not the same. We are drastically underpaid. I know that would come to a shock to some people that see the salaries get posted, but that's not accounting for the many, many hours extra that we choose to work in order to provide for our families. In terms of retention, the building itself, as I stated, is a morale killer. We don't feel safe in the building. It does not provide any type of training environment. We can't hold any kind of debriefing in there. We just had a critical incident on Friday night, and we couldn't accommodate for the individuals involved. We can't accommodate when we have other agencies. On Friday night, we had the state police, we had the DA's office, and we need to talk to those individuals involved. And they were working in the chief's office and in the patrol commander's office, and so it's embarrassing from a morale standpoint. So for retention purposes, a new station would go a long way. I know that if it doesn't happen, there will be officers that leave.
Yeah, certainly we see this comes up in many sectors outside of public safety where, it's a competitive market, and as you said, it's a tight pool of candidates, and we need to be able to, compensation is one thing, but also where you work is another. And I think probably more than anybody else, police and fire spend an inordinate amount of time in the workplace.
Eugenia, I've seen candidates come into the fire headquarters for an interview, and they're waiting for, the chief or the interview committee, and you just see them kind of looking around, and they can see, the mold, or they can see the water stains, or they can see the cracks in the floor, or they can smell unknown smells, or they can see mouse droppings, and they just kind of, exactly, we have the same issues that you have over there, you go to the kitchen, and 1 minute the stove's clean, the next minute there's mice droppings on top of the stove. So the candidate just kind of look around, they take this all in, and then, you offer them a job, and then they know where to be found.
They don't want to.
They don't want it.
So I think this is also a good time to note that what you describe is the result of many years of deferred maintenance, and these are old buildings. You mentioned, Jay, the central fire was built to accommodate horse-drawn wagons.
Correct.
The police station was built as a telephone exchange building. So these buildings were not intended for their current purpose. They have, 130 years old is one of them. The youngest one is 60. So it's not for lack of effort, I think, on the part of the city of Melrose to maintain the buildings. I think we've just reached a point, and this is what the analysis has proven to be true, that these buildings have, as you noted, Dale, outlived their usable lives. And this is, as Representative Liber-Garabedian noted, something that is pretty commonplace across the Commonwealth, where communities are facing the need to make these sorts of investments because the buildings they're old. So I think that's an important, it's why we're here. It's why there is this additional investment that's needed, and what the question is trying to get at, the ballot initiative is trying to get at. I'm going to mention that we are taking questions in real time, so if you would like to call or text, you can. The number is 781-317-5060. Again, 781-317-5060. Please feel free to send us a call or a text message to ask us a question. I see that we are actually joined by Mayor Broder, and so I'm going to ask him to step up for just a moment, because some of the questions that have come up recently have been about the role of the city in bringing this about, and also some of the tax implications. And so, Mayor Broder, if you would be so kind to join us, I'd field a couple questions you can field the questions that have come in that are specific to you.
I can try.
Okay.
No promises. Let's give it a go.
So one question that has come up quite a number of times is an easy one for you to answer. And that is, how does the project timeline influence repayment? This is a question that has come up a number of times. I think that we can be clear that a yes vote on Tuesday does not mean that a debt exclusion causes a tax increase to happen immediately.
That is correct. So it's a bit of a wonky answer, so bear with me, and I apologize.
We're going to take it in pieces. So the first piece is, it won't happen immediately.
Correct.
what is the first phase of work that needs to happen, and what would would folks expect to feel a cost associated with that?
Sure, it's a great question, and it's super important. So, particularly given the complex nature of what we're undertaking. So the first thing we need to do is essentially hire an architect to get us definitive plans. We essentially have, as you know from serving on the committee, we have conceptual plans that have identified needs and a cost estimate. That needs to be refined and further developed. So the first thing that the city needs to do is go out to bid for those plans. That is probably a $2 to $3 million cost that will be incurred once we go through that process, a bid process and a selection process. We will borrow that money, and that will be the kind of the beginning of the borrowing. When that bill hits, we'll go out to market for that. That is, I don't want to say there's no such thing as small impact when it's your tax money, but that is fairly small impact. Where the money starts to get serious is when we start building
The projects. Okay. So I just feel like this is such an important nuance that is sometimes difficult to understand. When we see the numbers that have come out for the projected total cost of the project, and that 875 estimated amount that's going to affect taxpayers per year, per household, based on a median home value, that number is for the total projected project cost. So
Correct.
all 4 buildings done, rolled up, we're talking about 875 for a 4-building project.
for the average homeowner.
For the average homeowner,
That
for
in Melrose
730.
right now is about $775,000.
$733,000, $2023 median home value. Yes,
And
single family home.
Folks know that the kind of the debt projection is on the city website. I think it's on the project website as well, in the frequently asked questions, as well as a formula you can apply to hear what your hit will be, because I think people quite reasonably go, oh, the average, blah, blah, that's great. What about me? Fair question, and it's easy for folks to figure that out.
Yes, yeah, and I know the public appreciates that you have put that calculation on the city website. It is a great resource. So the 875 hits when the 4 buildings are complete. It sounds like, though, there are certain phases along the way where, as work gets completed and borrowing occurs to complete that, there may be some modest impact to tax bills, but it is not known at this point that exact amount.
Correct.
Or when those will hit. That sounds like it's going to depend on how quickly the project work gets started. And really, the big milestones are construction and completion of buildings. That's when the big dollars have to be borrowed.
I'm sitting here nodding my head, which is not great.
I know.
For an audio-based,
Very
I know this
active.
video here, but for an audio-based production, that's not the smartest thing in the world. But the obligation to pay back obviously starts when you do the borrowing. And we do not go out to market. The city does not go out to market all at once to say, we're taking $130 million. And then this is where it gets a little bit wonky. You do these things called bandwidths of borrowing and anticipation notes to kind of start the process off. That ultimately gets rolled into kind of true borrowing, which is what this ultimately is all about. But folks should understand, I don't know if we've gotten into this, it is phased. We can't shut down the fire station and open all at once. We can't shut down the police department. We need these services to keep going. So the construction, particularly on the fire side, is going to be phased. So assuming all goes according to the plan, engine 3 will get done third, probably starting in maybe, this is a very rough estimate, say 2028. Then that borrowing won't hit until at least 2028. And that, again, that's based on when we need to pay bills,
Right.
not when we anticipate incurring a cost.
Yes. So I think the most important takeaway for the public, though, is a yes on Tuesday does not mean your taxes go up on Wednesday.
Correct.
It means that you have given the city permission to move forward with the planning and the final design work for these 4 buildings, that there will be opportunities along the way to assess what those costs are as the city is going to be borrowing to pay for them, and that ultimately we'll get to a place where the projected total cost for the full project is going to be, it's a projected cost, that $875 per year based on a median home value. But that as we're ramping up to 4 buildings, the increase will be sort of modest up until we finish that. And then for the bulk of the life of the borrowing, the repayment will be that full $875.
I hate to use words like modest, because that's depends who you are, right? If you got $20 and you owe someone $50.
Sure, yeah.
But
Relatively speaking.
I agree. Right. Within the whole schedule of debt, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, great. So on the website, on the city's website, as you noted, there's a frequently asked questions document. There is the debt model that you have referenced, which again is a sort of snapshot in time based on a number of different variables. And then there's this wonderful formula to help calculate the anticipated impact of the project.
One other thing, because
Yeah.
on the phone, because I have heard this, and I don't know if it will come up, that because there is not an amount referenced in the question, and maybe you did talk about it a little bit, that the sky's the limit, right?
Right.
That is not the case. The language, you quoted the language of the question, which comes essentially from state statute. We don't build that here in the city. That is the way Prop 2.5 works, and it is not a blank check. In the DOR, the state essentially pays attention, and they know what has been represented to the public and what the nature of the authorization of the debt exclusion will be. So it is not a situation people should feel very comfortable about, where we're not going to say, oh, we're going to roll in a bunch of new hires on police or fire side. That goes under operating. That won't happen. We are not, with the exception of some furnishings and capital equipment that needs to go with a new building. That does not mean we can use the debt exclusion to get a bunch of new cruisers or a new pumper or whatever the case may be. This is money that essentially goes into a separate, segregated fund, and the only thing this money can be used for by state law is to pay the debt incurred for the buildings.
I'm so glad that you said that. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think that is an important thing to drive home the point that there are measures of accountability and oversight built into this process throughout. And those dollars, it's not free money. It's not fun money.
Right.
It'll be fun for you guys when you have new buildings, but the money itself is intended to serve a very discrete purpose. So, excellent. One final question, and then I'm going to have Alyssa come up and have you rotate off. You got this process underway a couple of years ago. Can you speak a little bit about why this is such an important priority, whether it's for you or whoever the next generation of leadership is, and looking backwards? Why is this so important?
So I think the answer to the question, you misdescribed what I've done to a certain degree. I restarted a process that has been going on in the city of Melrose, at least in the recent past, since the mid-'90s. There is a plan on the shelf from the mid-'90s that never moved off the shelf. That was probably the first time the city took seriously what we're going to do about what were at the time substandard, or even if you take the physical condition of the buildings as okay, not modern buildings. And I think we do ourselves a little bit of a disservice when we just talk about the buildings being old. Because we got a lot of old buildings, they're at different levels of functionality. The functionality of the buildings doesn't match the modern need. So honestly, I would hate to be in a situation where we built something 10 years ago that isn't cutting it anymore. That conceivably could be, but the changing demands, as both the public safety folks have talked about, are different. What I'm not sure if it's clear, Dale, when you talked about custody exchanges, that when folks think of police, they think of more traditional custody, getting locked up. The police station is a place where sometimes we have families that, aren't in a good space, and they have to do some kind of a handoff of their kids. And a safe place to do that, one of a recommended safe places to do that, is the police station. That's great if everyone can walk up and down a flight of stairs, and even if you do that, what you get to at the top of the stairs at the Melrose Police Department is a room that is probably about the size of this table, where you can effectuate that kind of exchange. And that's one small example of what that space could be used for. Same thing on...
And that space is always open to the public, so
Absolutely.
when these families are doing these exchanges, there's still people coming in and out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And the same thing on the fire side, where there's no, maybe not quite as dramatic, but there's no modern public space for things like fire prevention, fire safety, public interaction, training, all the things that we know are important from a police and fire perspective. It's different than it was when those buildings were built, and those buildings can't accommodate those things that lead to, it's not just, I want folks to understand, it's not just about comfort, which is important, but it's about having our employees be able to do their job.
Right.
And do them professionally and safely. And so that's why it's needed. That's way far afield from the question that I think you
No, I
asked.
think that's an excellent. I think that's an excellent way to answer the question of why is this so essential and so important.
So then we had the 90, and then we had more or less 2017, another effort to do the same thing. And I say this with all respect to the process, but a somewhat constrained idea about what should be on the table or what should we pursue. That was a good faith effort, but I don't think would have led to a good long-term result. But to be fair, was very, I think, conscious of price, which is an important thing. But we need to talk about two things. Price is very important, but need and long-term planning is also very important. And so I'm more the third cut at this, really, with a lot of help from folks like yourself to get a project out in the public eye and subject to the debate, and a very strong proposal to bring to the voters, because it's obviously the first time that this has actually been brought to the voters.
Yes, yeah. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal that it is going to the voters on Tuesday the 7th. And for some who voted early, they've hopefully already voted yes. But I've heard you describe this as a priority for the decade. I think you just said it perfectly, that this is really about creating buildings that are functional, operational, and that allow you all to do your jobs to the best of your ability. I thank you so much, Mayor Broder, for coming up and joining us to answer the hard questions.
No worries. My pleasure. Happy to do it. And it's time.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the number one infrastructure priority for the city. Quite frankly, it should have been for a long time, but we know we have a lot of needs and we juggle those needs. But this is the time to move this forward.
Yeah. And I almost don't want to ask you this question because I truly do believe
I don't know what I'm doing next.
The community is the community understands the real need here. But the question has been asked, what happens if this doesn't pass on Tuesday? Then what?
I mean, I don't mean to be flip, but I guess back to the drawing board. I mean, there's there's a million ways you could skin this cat, I suppose, but we don't really have the luxury of time or a debate. I don't be over it. Nothing's ever over until it's over, but this is the time to act. We can talk about this for another 20 years. We will be doing it with
Out
the
of police
impacts,
and fire department.
right, the impacts that these folks
Yeah.
spoke about, not just the buildings themselves, but the impacts on morale, staffing, compensation, all those things go into the mix. Everything they said is correct about conditions and recruitment and the changing nature of who wants to do these jobs. And the longer we wait to address this, the harder that's going to be. And if we don't have, if we can't retain a workforce over time, that's at least as bad as not having the proper facilities, because we rely on experience, we rely on a pipeline of talent that we can retain and brings up, you know, the next generation of expertise and leadership within these departments. And the physical plant is a super important part of that, and it just can't be ignored anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't have a good answer to
That's a good one. There is
what's
no
next,
yeah.
because we,
Yeah.
you know, we need the buildings.
Yeah.
We just do.
The time is now. There's no more road to kick the can down.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for answering these questions. And I'm going to invite Alyssa to come back up, and
Alyssa, come on
you
back.
may rotate over. We only have 4 mics, so so thank you so much, Mayor Broder.
Sure.
So we're just about at the end of our hour together, and I want to give you, Alyssa, a moment. You know, the campaign has been volunteer-led. It's co-chaired by you and Corey Thomas, also a lifelong resident of Melrose. I've heard you speak before about why this is so important to you, but I would invite you to speak again about why it is that you have identified this as a priority that you have invested your time in and your dedication to.
So I think, like everybody else, I'm a homeowner in Melrose. I've been a resident in Melrose my entire life. I'm as invested as everybody else. I've also watched the evolution of the city, you know, from, you know, being a lifelong resident and seeing how the city's evolved and, you know, the downtown and everything else. And I've watched the public safety buildings not be included in that evolution, and seeing our public safety officers not be included with, you know, with these newer buildings and these, you know, newer facilities. Like Mayor Broder just alluded to, it's time. This has been brought up this is the third occasion. Like he said, 1996, 2017, and now again in 2022. There's no reason for, you know, these gentlemen and also women that are on both forces to be living and working in conditions such as this. Nobody wants to spend extra money on anything nowadays, and we understand that people's financial situations are, you know, at their peak. Everybody's is, as is mine too, and that's why I think it's very poignant that I let people know that, you know, I'm paying taxes too, and I feel very strongly about it. But it's time. The investment is now. This is the only way that we're going to be able to get the facilities that we need, and there's really no reason, you know, why we shouldn't. So I guess I'm very passionate about it, and that's how I ended up as a co-chair on this campaign. And like you had asked him, you know, what happens if the vote doesn't pass? I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't know what would happen. So.
Yeah. And so between now and next Tuesday, there's a website that you all have created.
Correct. We have our melroseresponds.org website. We have a Facebook page. There's tons of information on there. There's a FAQ where you can get, you know, a lot of the stuff that we spoke about today, as well as a bunch of different answers to questions. You can find the project itself, all of the information that was submitted with more specifics about the financial impact. There's a link to the City of Melrose website that Mayor Broder just spoke about to get your calculations specifically if you know your specific assessment of your home. There's also the specific estimates of the cost of each building and how the $130 million estimate is broken down by each building for the fire and police. So there's quite a bit of information. And then there's also a link to reach out to myself and or Corey if you have any specific questions and want to speak to us independently.
Great. Thank you so much,
You're
Alyssa.
welcome.
Jay and Dale, this is sort of the moment. We kind of are hearing it's sort of now or never. We need to really meet this moment with an investment in the facilities that you all live and work in. Explain, like, this is your last, moment before the election day to kind of talk to voters. Explain again, sort of from your vantage point, why it's so important that the public view this as an investment that is worthy of them making.
Right. I think from the fire standpoint, I've been here for 2 out of the 3 studies, and this is the first time, I think Mayor alluded to it as well, that a committee has really, taken it serious and done all the homework and come up with some numbers and a process and a plan. And, to thank you, Alicia, and Corey, and Jeff, and Sam, and yourself, Eugenia, to take this seriously over the last 2 years is great. And I think it's important for the public to understand that, the time is now. We have to do this for employee morale, for the men and women of the fire department, better living conditions and working conditions, so we can do our job effectively, for the residents. It's very difficult to do a job, with leaky roofs and unsafe electrical and plumbing and mold, et cetera, and the way the stations are built right now, not conducive to firefighting and doing our job today. So I do think it's imperative that we do this now to better serve the residents. And, I think the committee has done a great job of putting together the plan and the financial impacts and how that's going to look for the residents. And I think it's important.
Thank you.
From our perspective, the time has to be now because when we talked about the location of a new police station being the Ripley School location, that was the last remaining site. When we were working on this together on this committee, we looked at 12 different sites. And the idea was that we didn't want to ask the taxpayers to buy any land, so we needed to find something that was owned by the city already, not being used. And although Ripley is being used, that contract is coming to an end, and the timeline matched up for us. So we're out of space because when that contract lapses, if we don't take that location, someone probably will. And then there are no more spaces. We would have to.
The cost just goes up.
The cost would go up because we would have to purchase land to build a new station. And I'm trying to think what you just said about. I just had another thought and it's gone.
Well, while you think of your other thought, I will say that, as someone who has been involved in this process for the last couple of years, I learned a lot about the police and fire department needs and what it is that you all, actually do versus what my perception of police and fire services are. And these buildings, the places where you work, are really integral to the community and are part of the community's infrastructure and a really essential part of our day in and day out, sort of how we function as a community. And so the buildings themselves are as much a part of the community. You've both spoken about how, they're a place where people can convene. They're a place where people seek help. They're the places where you might see somebody on their very worst day and their very worst moment, but they're also places where there's collaboration and community building. And we've heard stories of, common spaces being used to run vaccination clinics during COVID and things like this. So they are a really important part of the community and serve multiple functions, as do your departments. And we aren't asking, without acting now, we're not actually, my understanding from doing this is the costs just continue to increase over time, and the risk of a negative outcome only increases over time with further inaction. But that is me from the outside looking in, and someone who is very intimately involved in the study that led to the recommendation. From a personal perspective, you have both spoken about kind of what the space means to you, but I think that's a great, we'll end on a very personal note as well, kind of what this building what these investments really mean for you.
For me, on a personal level, it would show that the city is willing to invest in the police department. It's no secret that the public view of police has changed in the last few years, and we certainly feel that we're not as supported as we used to be. So it would show that we are cared about, and I think that would alone increase productivity. It would increase how we handle calls, and hopefully then that would have a positive impact on recruiting and retention, because right now we have people that are being forced onto triples, which is definitely not safe for the officers or the community. Being forced onto doubles is a routine thing in Melrose, so hopefully we can see that the city cares about us and wants to invest in us.
Yeah.
I echo what Dale says. It shows the city cares and is about us. We're invested in them. We'll do our job. Regardless of whether the debt exclusion passes, we're still going to do our job. But I think, with new buildings and new stations, it'll give us the tools and the ability to do our job better. Especially on the fire side, is to maintain the 3 buildings so we can continue to respond adequately to all the areas of the city. I mean, unlike the police department, we do work out of the buildings, so it's important to have the buildings, the 3 buildings that we have now. And I think a yes vote would show us that the city's invested in us, like we are invested in them as well.
Well, I think that is the perfect note to end on. I thank you all for taking time this evening to join me in this conversation, and also thank folks in the public for joining us as well. As Alyssa mentioned, there is a website, melroseresponds.org, is a wealth of knowledge and information. And I encourage people to turn out on Tuesday the 7th and vote yes for this ballot initiative. Thank you so much and have a great evening.